we are not supposed to teach everything.
That's today's guest, professor, author, composer, and choral director Marques Garrett, releasing us from perfection. Welcome to Music Ed Insights. I'm leadership trainer and former band director Alan Fire, here with composer and co-college music education program head Steve Shanley.
Each episode, Alan and I talk with national thought leaders in music education with practical insights for K-12 music educators.
Steve, tell us about our guest.
Marques Garrett serves as Associate Professor of Choral Studies at the University of North Texas. An active conductor and performer, Dr. Garrett is a guest conductor, clinician, and singer with school, church, festival, and community choirs throughout the country. He's an avid composer of choral and solo vocal music, whose compositions have been performed to acclaim by high school, all-state, collegiate, and professional choirs. As a researcher, Dr. Garrett's most advantageous topic is the non-idiomatic choral music of Black composers. And if you aren't sure what that means, we discuss it in detail during the first of this two-part interview. His lectures at state and regional conferences of the American Choral Directors Association and at other venues afford him the opportunity to showcase this underrepresented area of music, resulting in the anthology, The Oxford Book of Choral Music by Black Composers. Find Marques's full bio, show notes, and resources at musicedinsights.com. Alan, what was the takeaway you had from this episode?
So many good stories. I know that's not a takeaway, but he is a captivating and thought-provoking storyteller. And each of them has a lesson. And that's why this is a two-parter. How about you?
As referenced in the cold open, I like how he frees us from feeling like we have to be able to teach every genre of music. There simply isn't time.
Yeah, and he extends that. He has a real emphasis on having grace rather than jumping to conclusions about the intentions of others. And I think that's cool. This is the first part of a two-part episode. We promise it's worth it. And a reminder, insiders get ad-free episodes. If you want the benefits of being a Music Ed Insights insider, head to our website to learn more. But for now, let's hear from Marques Garrett.
Marques Garrett, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
We've asked you to join us today and speak about repertoire selection for our groups, particularly choirs, though I'm certain your thoughts will apply to all of us who program for any type of musical ensemble. Let's start with a quick definition. What do you mean when you refer to non-idiomatic music, especially as it pertains to Black composers?
So the use of this term came from a conversation with one of my really good friends, who's a colleague, Alex Favazza Jr. He and I were at Florida State together working on our doctorates. And in the midst of many conversations, he learned very quickly how much I love the music of Black composers. And as I was seeing what my teachers and cohort mates were doing professionally with conference presentations and the like, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And I said, I really want to talk about this original choral music that's like non-spiritual, gospel, or jazz. And he said, well, what it sounds like is you're saying that that kind of music is idiomatic and this other stuff is not. And I said, ooh, that makes me sound really smart. So I'm going to take that from you, and always do as a good researcher does. When you steal from someone, you at least tell people where you stole it from. Like, you're not hiding it. Yeah. So that would be where the term non-idiomatic comes from. And now that it's been used more frequently, I like to clarify that the term refers to the music and not the composers. Composers are not non-idiomatic. Music or art can be.
So is this applicable to all races, ethnicities? If a white person writes a spiritual, is that non-idiomatic for them? Like, let's just talk a little bit more about what this term means or how you prefer it be used.
That's great. And it illustrates how language can be viewed by one person or one group of people one way and viewed differently by a different group of people. Speaking directly to your example about a white person arranging a spiritual, generally speaking, yes, that would be considered non-idiomatic. However, I would imagine there's an example of some white person who may have been adopted by a Black family, and they went to churches or attended a church, were members of a church that sang a lot of spirituals. So that's music that they grew up with, while their skin color and their genetics don't allow them to identify with that music from, I guess, that lineage. It all depends on how people choose to relate the music to other people. And so if it's culture, culture is not just about blood. It's not just about DNA. It's about other things. There was a little uproar when I lived in Nebraska about a piece that Lee Nelson had chosen for the Nebraska All-State. I don't know if it was actually an arrangement of the spiritual or it was some adaptation of the spiritual Soon I Will Be Done by Kyle Peterson. It was done for, I think it was commissioned by Lee for Wartburg Choir. And when the repertoire went out to the Nebraska teachers, some of them were not happy about it because they felt like not only did you have this white Minnesotan who had arranged a spiritual, but then it had like spoken word, which is basically like rap, and that's not a part of. And so there were many conversations. I still don't know how I got invited to this Zoom that I was like, I'm not a high school teacher. I have nothing to do with the All-State. Why am I part of this? But it was nice for me to be a part of it because then I learned that Kyle had been doing spoken word for like 20, 25 years. So people immediately judged him based on his skin color and based on the state that he lived in and said that because of this and that, you don't have the right to that. Well, I'm like, well, who actually determines who has the right to art? And my growing opinion, and it's just my opinion, is that the only person or people that own art are the people who created it. And I mean like the individual people, not just because we have some things in common, we all then get to own that. Because I don't want somebody to think that because they're Black that they own something of mine. I'm like, no, it's mine, not yours. You don't get to determine what happens with it. And essentially, because it's art, nobody really gets to determine what happens with it, even sometimes the artist, because that's just what art is.
Do I understand correctly that when you first started thinking about this idea of non idiomatic, it was not so much to say that only Black composers, arrangers, conductors, and choirs should be singing gospel music or spirituals. Rather, there's all of this great music by Black composers that are not gospels and spirituals that I wish people would know about and consider performing with their groups. Do I understand sort of the root of how this came to be correctly?
That's exactly it. I went to Hampton University, historically Black college in Virginia, and it was there that I learned so much music by Black composers. And I didn't realize how unique it was for HBCU choirs and some of the predominantly Black Christian, like Protestant denominations, those churches that were doing this music, the anthems, the part songs, the just all the stuff. And it wasn't until I first went to grad school and I was talking about Hale Stork and R. Nathaniel Dett and Undine Smith Moore and specifically mentioning pieces that people were like, wait, what are you talking about? Now they knew Verdi. They could tell you everything about every movement of his Requiem. They could tell you about the origin of probably every measure in B minor mass. But they couldn't tell you a single thing about Hale Stork's I Will Lift Up Mine Eyes or the Ordering of Moses or Scenes from the Life of a Martyr. Like they just didn't know those things. And it was those conversations combined with some students saying, oh, I didn't know that Black composers had done anything other than spirituals. And it was really nice for me to actually hear those words. And at first I got very upset because I was like, how dare you? But then I realized, Marcus, he doesn't know it because he wasn't taught it. And you have the textbooks that only had a certain thing. And it's a common phrase that people have shared, but maybe some people haven't heard it. You don't know what you don't know. So that's when I said, I just need to like talk about it a little bit more. So a couple of the papers that I did working on my master's were geared toward that. And almost every time I got the choice to choose a piece to conduct while I was at UNCG, I chose a piece by a Black composer. And then when I get to Florida State, thankfully more people knew about it, but because it was a research degree, I had to do some studies and classes. And one of those studies that I did was ask 15 predominantly white institution graduates and 15 HBCU graduates what their favorite three pieces by Black composer were. And that gave me this very simple, basic information, but the start of some data that could be used to help inform. And I mean, overwhelmingly, the HBCU graduates chose what we now people would say is like the non-idiomatic music, overwhelmingly compared to the PWI graduates. I think there was only one of those 15 who actually listed either two or three that were not spirituals, gospel, or jazz. And every other one, almost all of them listed only those three.
So, do you see these efforts of yours making others more aware of non-idiomatic music of Black composers, resulting in increased performances? Do you feel like it's making a difference?
I do. And it's kind of overwhelming at times. When I first started seeing, this was pandemic, so we were stuck on the internet. You just saw everything that everybody was doing. I would either see a concert program or someone would text me, and it was either where I saw more ethnic representation than I had seen before, or they were specifically using that terminology, saying, okay, we've got non-idiomatic music of Black composers as part of this representation. And I remember texting a few people and I was like, wait a minute, are they using this term because of me? I was like, I don't think anybody was like using that term. Now, I've said many times, I wasn't the first person to talk about this stuff. With ACDA, the Choral Journal has been around for quite some time. And there are a couple articles where the author said, don't forget, Black composers have written more than blah, blah, blah. And I mean, they had listed a few things. I was just blessed and fortunate to be in a time where the information can be spread much more quickly. And because of the circumstances of everybody being stuck on their phones or their laptops, then they were able to see this information just in different spaces and different places, causing them to think differently about how they choose to program.
Well, the choral community does seem to be aware that we tend to program idiomatic pieces as concert closers to the point where some are actively avoiding the practice or sometimes even shunning teachers who might choose to close a concert with an up-tempo and exciting gospel selection. What's your take on this?
It's nuanced. There is no formula that's going to work for every concert and for every conductor and just every experience. Do I almost always end concerts with spirituals? I don't even know. Have I ended concerts with spirituals? Yep. Because there are just sometimes you can't do anything after one of those pieces. Or, sorry, you do have the ability to do it, but it tends to be a little bit of a downer. You come from all of this high energy performing. And especially if it's a gospel piece and you've got a band up there and the audience gets up and they're, clapping and potentially even singing along, since that's really, I mean, gospel music is supposed to be communal, like it's repetitious so that people can actually join in. Um, it's hard to then come out of that and then unless you're saying Olaf and then you go into Beautiful Savior, like aside from that, like it can be a little bit of a downer for your regular concert goers. So if you're a high school teacher, knowing that you don't have all of these academic musicologists and New York Times critics who are going to be there. You just have the grandmother who makes a really good sweet potato pie, or you have the father who just got off work who was just doing construction on the highway that's like 7 miles away. Honestly, they don't care. They couldn't tell you a single composer of a piece. They couldn't even tell you the name of the song. And half the songs may even be in another language, and they're just like, and there's no translation, so they're just like, you just sound like you were singing about spaghetti and lasagna the whole time. So I don't even know. And even the songs that are in English, the diction isn't good enough for anybody to understand the words. So I understand the philosophical reason for people saying not to do it, but my grandmothers would feel a little weird if I went from Moses Hogan up tempo Jubilee spiritual arrangement to Palestrina Siku Cherubus. It just doesn't work for me. I think part of it is that if there's Black representation or the history of those sentiments about ending with this up-tempo spiritual arrangement or gospel piece is that that was typically the only representation of Black composers and the musical representation, I should say, of what Black people can offer. So even though I'm pretty sure my very first full concert at UNT, I ended with Moses Hogan's My Soul's Been Anchored because, again, couldn't really do anything after that. I also programmed a sorrow spiritual arrangement earlier in the concert. It's about making sure that you're intentional about what you're going to program and where and how it all goes together.
So I think transitioning into programming advice in general, because I think this is an instance where people are trying to do the right thing and they want to do good and they want to broaden their horizons. And maybe in the process, some of those things like, well, you can't end with a gospel piece, that's disrespectful, sort of mistakenly crept into the thinking. So what are your thoughts in general on programming? Thoughts about concerts that might feature all Black composers or a concert that's all female composers? Or what do you think when you see one single program from a high school choir and all four selections are by white men? Do you think every performance should be filled with a diversity of composers? Is it okay as long as there's diversity throughout the semester or year? And I know that's a whole bunch of questions. Whichever one of those is most appealing for you to jump on first, please do so.
The easiest answer is have the best intentions and understand that you will never please everyone. And if you are okay with not pleasing everyone, but trying to, then you'll probably rest easier. Longer answer is yeah, if I do see a concert that has, like you said, it's by four white men, I will have some thoughts. And I probably will share that with friends. It also depends on whether or not I know what that conductor has done. Now, it would be in everyone's best interest, myself included, to actually take the time to investigate instead of reacting to your initial emotion. So yes, everybody has every right to initially be upset by that and like, what really, this is what's going on. This is what happened. They didn't blah, 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 blah. It's not helpful to then just say that to friends or post that on social media and that kind of stuff. Because I've seen far too many times where people don't actually look at other things. There was a recent conversation that I was having with some friends about spiritual arrangements, basically for developmental groups. And several people only mention white arrangers. And people get very upset. And I said, okay, but let's also think, how many Black composers and arrangers can you name who have developmental spiritual arrangements? Can't name a single one other than Victor Johnson, really. I mean, there are some others, but there are several white composers who have realized that they do well with developmental level repertoire. And so they want to make sure that those students, those choirs, have the opportunity to do all that. And I understand that Black composers, many of them went to historically Black colleges, so their spirituals that they're sang were all unaccompanied. They were 4, 6, 8, sometimes 12 parts. That's what they're used to. And they want to maybe make a name for themselves when it comes to spiritual arrangements. So they're not trying to do the middle school level music that's not going to get them a Grammy. They're like, I want to write for these other groups that everybody knows so I can be famous. And That's when you determine, do you want to be famous? Do you want to make money? And because just because you're famous doesn't mean you're making money all the time. So, like I said, there are so many factors that are involved. Have the conversations, do the research, try things out, understand that you may make a mistake. Someone may call you out on it. Hopefully, they have the best intentions. You respond with the best intentions, validating their feelings and their thoughts and emotions and all that stuff. And maybe they will give you then the opportunity to share why you made that decision and then try to be better. I know of one conductor who programmed a spiritual arrangement, and everybody says, do your research, do your research, do your research. So how did this conductor do research? He looked at a very well-respected conductor who had performed that same spiritual arrangement. And in that conductor's performance, there was that choreography that happened. Well, this white conductor then had his ensemble do all of that stuff. And then I'm getting text messages saying, I can't believe this person did that. And I was like, this sounds vaguely familiar. So what did I do? Instead of just saying, y'all are right. Oh, how dare, blah, 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 I did my own research and I said, it's this arrangement that was premiered by this choir, by this very well-known conductor. Guess what? He did everything that that person did, and now y'all are getting upset. That's what we call hypocrisy. I use that example to illustrate how people can do the right thing and people still get upset. But there are many examples where people did the right thing and nobody got upset, but nobody also praised them because we don't know the work that some people do unless they're like, hey, these are all the things that I did. And then it's like, well, why you got to tell us that? So, it's a catch 22. You make people upset if you do, you make people upset if you don't. So program the best way that you possibly can. And if you can't find the music that you need, then talk to people. If you're able to write your own music, write your own music. But also, as I was sharing with a colleague today, you everybody doesn't have like these big commission budgets. They don't even have big budgets to begin with, but you can get groups of schools or groups of choirs together and y'all create your own consortium and say, hey, we like the 20 of us have all contributed $150. We now have this money to offer you, composer. We'd like for you to write a piece. And I don't know a single composer who would get upset at $3,000 coming in from 20 people versus one. Because guess what? The Venmo, the direct deposit, the check, it's all the same.
I'm glad you mentioned the developing choirs and middle school, because one thing Alan and I have heard from listeners over the years as we discuss this is, yeah, if I were teaching at the University of North Texas and I had those singers, I could program whatever I wanted, and diversity of programming wouldn't be difficult. But do you know how tough it is to find a truly beginning band piece that only uses the first 5 notes of the scale that was written by a black woman? Good luck. You can't find one.
And I mean, you speak about band, and the only black composer I can think of is Omar Thomas, and I don't think he has any of that. He has like one piece, I think that might be grade 3 from the last time I saw his website, but a similar thing. He's getting commissions by these big universities, and maybe he gets them from high schools, but guess what? Those high schools are performing at maybe like TMEA or Midwest.
Exactly.
And your developmental, I haven't been to Midwest, but I don't think that developmental groups are generally the ones that perform on like a main
Well, the
stage.
joke is they're there, but our joke is, well, a Texas developmental group is like an outstanding high school group most other parts of the country. So,
Okay, now let's be okay. I have to let people know that that is all good marketing because there are still plenty of developmental bands, orchestras, choirs, mariachi ensembles, kazoo groups that are just like every other state. It's just that those conductors, those teachers choose not to publicize what they do. And that also gets into this whole thing of like these conference performances. I remember being in Nebraska where it was like, well, Western Nebraska folks, we don't have the same type of resources that Lincoln and Omaha area do. So we're not going to try to perform at this conference or that conference. And it's like, or even try to present because they're like, nobody's going to offer anything. But I'm like, I want our professional organizations to highlight those groups that, speaking specifically about choir, that have a middle school group that has boys in there who are still trying to match pitch, because so many of the people that attend these conferences have groups like that, and they need to see that there are other people who are like that. But I also understand that musicians, by and large, are some of the most critical people ever. It's like when my partner was talking about a podcast that he had listened to, saying that only in music can you get 99.9% of everything correct, and you are then deemed as like a bad artist. Whereas in science, you can get like 65% and you win a Nobel Prize. Like it's like, and so I'm trying to get more people out of that. And my colleague, Ben Graff, who teaches, from what we've been told, the two largest theory classes in the country, sometimes he'll have 140 and 150 in each class. That's a lot of students in theory. He likes to, when they're doing their reading, their oral skills, he doesn't always mark students down for getting a note wrong. His big thing is, if you mess up, let's see, the last three notes of this measure, can you get back into C major, even though you went into A flat somehow? Can you get back in? Because that's the real test. That's truly what it is, because we are not perfect people. So that was nothing of what we were talking about, but it felt like it needed to be said.
Yeah, it was great. Two things. One, there's a band piece on that topic. Steve, do you remember the name of it? It's by Thomas Duffy, something like the A Plus March, where we consider it 99%. Tony Garmo is big on that piece.
Yeah.
Our friend Tony. It was the idea that an A plus is 99%, and each part is marked with in your part, this is the number of mistakes you'll need to make to equate to a 99% perfection. And so a band will prepare it and play it through close to 100% accuracy. Of course, there might be a mistake or two, but then they'll play it again, and each player will play 1% of the markings inaccurately. And then the audience hears just what the difference is between 99% and 100%. It's really effective. I don't think there's a choral equivalent, so that could be
I guess
another idea for you.
It's kind of like, so in my most recent concert at UNT, I told everyone, I said, now, contrary to popular belief, we and all of these college ensembles, we are not professional performing groups. These are student musicians who are learning. I should have done it earlier in the concert, but that's irrelevant. I had my students read 8 or 16 measures of a song that we had touched. We had only read through it maybe 3 times. And so they sounded good, but then I made them keep going. And they didn't know that I was going to have them keep going. And so they were like, and then we cut, and we had worked on the ending a little bit more, but I wanted people to see, like, this is actually what happens in the rehearsal. And then we get to the other part of it. So it wasn't like a real performance, but I mean, we did perform. No, it was a real performance because we were in front of people. That's what a real performance is. Anyway.
The other thing I wanted to ask is, you mentioned kazoo groups. Is there a leading national expert on kazoo groups? Because we haven't had a guest yet, expert in the kazoo.
I don't know. Maybe you need to. Would that be like a Kodai or Orff thing? Maybe you need to talk to someone in those fields, and maybe they know. There's a PhD student in music education here who's in my choir. She might know if there's a leading kazoo expert. I'm sure there is. There's something for everybody.
Yeah, someone needed to get their PhD and needed a topic, and no one's planted their flag here yet. I'll do that.
They did their lit review, and it was really tiny.
Yes, exactly. And had a good excuse for a short chapter 1.
Yes.
Thanks for listening to Music Ed Insights.
We're supported by Group Dynamic, a leading provider of youth leadership workshops. Alan works with dozens of schools each year to help develop their leaders. Learn more at groupdynamic.net alan.youth-leadership.
Or you could email me at alan@groupdynamic.net. Also sponsored by the Co-College Music Education Program. They've got a website too.
Just click their link at our website or email me at shanley@coe.edu.
Also, The Normal Design, helping normal companies and people create memorable, meaningful, and professional designs and branding. More at thenormaldesign.com.
And Winterset Websites, website design and maintenance. wintersetwebsites.com.
Our Facebook page is Music Ed Insights.
Our website has program notes, links, and a one-page download of this episode's key takeaways. That's musicedinsights.com.
New episodes generally drop every couple weeks on Monday.
Get current.
Stay relevant.
Music Ed Insights.